بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السيد رئيس الاتحاد البرلماني الدولي والزميل العزيز، الزميلات والزملاء رؤساء البرلمانات الإفريقية، الزملاء والزميلات البرلمانيين والبرلمانيات والبرلمانيين، السيد منسق المبادرة من أجل حكومة منفتحة، السيدات والسادة مسؤولي المنظمات غير الحكومية، السيدات والسادة مسؤولي المنظمات الدولية، السيدات والسادة الحضور الكريم، يشرفني باسم زميلي السيد رشيد طالب العلمي رئيس مجلس النواب المغربي الذي أبلغكم تحياته الحارة، والذي كان بوده أن يحضر بينكم اليوم لولا مهام وطنية إفريقية حالت دون ذلك. فباسم السيد الرئيس ونيابة عنه أؤكد لكم أننا سعداء في مجلس النواب المغربي بتنظيم هذا اليوم البرلماني الذي ينعقد في إطار اللقاء الإفريقي بشأن مبادرة الشراكة من أجل حكومة منفتحة، والمنظم تحت الرعاية السامية لصاحب الجلالة الملك محمد السادس نصره الله، ويعتبر لقاءً فريداً ومبدعاً ما دام يجمع ربما لأول مرة الحكومات والبرلمانات وهيئات المجتمع المدني ومسؤولي الجماعات الترابية وممثل الهيئات الدولية وعدداً من المانحين الدوليين من أجل نقاش تفاعلي حول قضايا نبيلة. وأود في البداية أن أرحب بالجميع، رئيس الاتحاد البرلماني الدولي والزملاء رؤساء ورئيسات وأعضاء البرلمانات الإفريقية وممثل الحكومات المركزية والمحلية ومسؤول المجتمع المدني الإفريقي، شاكراً لمبادرة الشراكة من أجل حكومة منفتحة اختيارها المملكة المغربية لاحتضان هذا اللقاء الهام، عربوناً على انخراط بلادنا برلماناً وجماعات ترابية ومنظمات غير حكومية في قيم ومبادئ الشراكة من أجل حكومة منفتحة، وما تستلزمه من سياسات وإصلاحات وما يترتب عن هذا الانخراط من التزامات. وإذا كان الحضور المكثف والمتنوع في هذا اللقاء يعكس الرغبة الجماعية في الحوار بشأن القضايا هي اليوم في صلب إشكاليات السياق الدولي الراهن، فإنه يجسد أيضاً الثقة والتقدير الذي تحظى به المملكة المغربية على المستوى الدولي وأساساً على المستوى إفريقيا والشرق الأوسط. فبلادنا ليست فقط ركيزة استقرار إقليمي وقاري ودولي، ولكنها أرض قرارات إفريقية ودولية. فمن الدار البيضاء انطلقت فكرة إنشاء منظمة الوحدة الإفريقية سنة 1961، وفي مراكش تأسست قبل 28 عاماً منظمة التجارة العالمية والتوقيع على الوثائق النهائية لاتفاقية التجارة والتعرفة الجمركية المعروفة اختصاراً بالغات سنة 1994، والتي أطلقت ديناميات حاسمة في التجارة الدولية. وفي مراكش تم قبل 6 سنوات إطلاق مبادرات مهيكلة في سياق الترافع من أجل العدالة المناخية لإفريقيا، إذ أطلق صاحب الجلالة الملك محمد السادس نصره الله مع عدد من أشقائه رؤساء الدول الأفارقة بمناسبة قمة المناخ في سنة 2016 مبادرات ملموسة للدعم والشراكة بين بلدان القارة، وخاصة مبادرة ملائمة الفلاحة الإفريقية والمعروفة اختصاراً بالإتخوازا. السادة الرؤساء، الزميلات والزملاء، السيدات والسادة المحترمين، تقع الإشكاليات التي يناقشها هذا اللقاء الجهوي في صميم اختصاصات البرلمانات، وتكتسي راهنية كبرى بالنسبة لشعوبنا الإفريقية المتطلعة للتنمية والازدهار والمنخرطة في ترسيخ البناء الديمقراطي والمؤسساتي. فإشكالية الدين العمومي خاصة الخارجي تتصدر اليوم في سياق ما بعد جائحة كوفيد-19 وتداعيات السياق الدولي الجيوسياسي الصعب وانشغال غالبية البلدان الإفريقية حكومات وبرلمانات، والتي تقع عليها مسؤولية الترافع لدى المانحين الدوليين من أجل تخفيف عبء الدين عن بلدان قارتنا. وبالتأكيد فإن خطابات التضامن الدولي مع إفريقيا والدعم وما يسمى بالمساعدة من أجل التنمية ممتحنة اليوم كما امتحن التضامن العالمي بالأمس القريب خلال جائحة كوفيد-19، حيث واجهت إفريقيا بإمكانياتها الخاصة الوباء وتداعياته أيضاً. السيدات والسادة، نناقش في هذا اللقاء إشكالات أخرى لا تقل أهمية عن تدبير الدين العمومي وشفافيته من قبيل الولوج العادل للخدمات العمومية والاستفادة من التجهيزات الأساسية والرقمنة والعدالة المجالية وقضايا النوع الاجتماعي، ونجعلها وعندما تتصدى إفريقيا لهذه الإشكاليات ونجعلها في قلب السياسات العمومية لبلداننا، فإننا نقوم بذلك من باب الاختيار الواعي والإرادي واعتباراً لحاجيات وطنية وليس إرضاءً لأي طرف خارجي. وإذا كانت هذه الأوراش من الدعامات الأساسية لبناء الديمقراطية وإعطائها مدلولاً ملموساً، فإنها تحتاج إلى التمويلات الضرورية وإلى شراكة دولية صادقة وإلى إرادة صادقة لتحويل التكنولوجيا من الشمال إلى الجنوب وخاصة إلى إفريقيا، وإلى السياسات المدعومة دولياً لتحويل إمكانيات قارتنا إلى ثروات منتجة للدخل والعيش الكريم والازدهار. وقد أثبتت التجارب الدولية في التاريخ المعاصر أن ما من أمة نهضت دون دعم هيكلي مستدام، وإفريقيا التي تقع في قلب رهانات دولية كبرى وتتسابق القوى الكبرى لاستغلال خيراتها هي قارة المستقبل بمواردها البشرية الشابة وبأراضيها الزراعية الخصبة وبمواردها الأولية الباهظة الثمن وبشواطئها الممتدة على حوالي 26 ألف كيلومتر وما تختزنه البحار والمحيطات المحيطة بالقارة الإفريقية. بكل ذلك هي مؤهلة لتكون أرض الديناميات الاقتصادية وجذب الاستثمارات، شريطة أن تدرك مصالحها وشريطة التوجه إلى المستقبل، وأن تحرص بلدانها على احترام واختيارات البلد الآخر ووحدته الترابية. السيدات والسادة، للبرلمانات أدوار حاسمة في تحقيق أهداف وقيم الشراكة من أجل حكومة منفتحة، فهي مدعوة إلى اعتماد التشريعات الضرورية لبلوغ هذه الأهداف، ومطالبة بممارسة الرقابة على الحكومات في مجال الشراكة من أجل حكومة منفتحة وما يرتبط بها. وهي مطالبة ثالثاً بإخضاع السياسات العمومية بشأن قيم وفلسفة الحكومات المنفتحة للتقييم البرلماني. والبرلمانات في المقام الأول مطالبة بأن تكون قدوة للمجتمعات فيما يرجع للشفافية والتصريح بالممتلكات وتجنب تنازع المصالح وهي مطالبة أيضاً بأن تكون قريبة من المجتمع ومصغية ونموذجاً في الانفتاح على المواطنات والمواطنين، وخاصة عبر هيئات المجتمع المدني القادرة على تعبئة مبادرات المواطنات والمواطنين في إطار الديمقراطية التشاركية. وإذ أجدد الترحيب بممثلي وممثلات منظمات المجتمع المدني الإفريقي المشاركين في هذا اللقاء، أود أن أثني على يقظة إثراء الممارسة الديمقراطية في قارتنا الإفريقية، وأشدد على أدوارها الحاسمة في إثراء الممارسة الديمقراطية في سياق ما أحوجنا فيه إلى الإسناد. وما من شك أن قيم التطوع والصدق والثقة في إمكانيات إفريقيا هي من محفزات تعبئة المجتمع المدني الإفريقي فيما ينجزه في مجال التنمية التضامنية والبيئة والتوعية والمساواة بين النساء والرجال في الحقوق. ومع ذلك فإن هذا العمل النبيل والذي ينجزه المجتمع المدني الإفريقي في حاجة إلى التمويل والدعم والمواكبة بما يكفل استدامته واستقلاليته. وعلينا كبرلمانات أن نستحضر الأدوار المدنية النبيلة ونحرص على إقامة الشراكات المنتجة مع المجتمع المدني، وتتيح مبادرة الشراكة من أجل حكومة منفتحة فرصاً ثمينة لتلك الشراكات، خاصة فيما يرجع إلى الإعداد المشترك لا كوكرياسيون لالتزامات البرلمانات في إطار هذه الآليات الدولية. وإذا كان من الضروري والأنجع احترام الحدود بين السياسي والحزبي والمدني ومهام وأدوار الأحزاب من جهة وأدوار المجتمعات المدنية من جهة أخرى، فإن الأهداف تظل واحدة، هي تعزيز البناء الديمقراطي في إفريقيا وفق سياقات وثقافة بلدانها واحترام قراراتها وتيسير المشاركة الواعية في تدبير الشأن العام وتعزيز للاستقرار. هذا الشرط الضروري للتنمية والتقدم. كما أكد ذلك صاحب الجلالة الملك محمد السادس أعزه الله أمام القمة 28 للاتحاد الإفريقي، وحيث قال جلالته: فإفريقيا قادرة بل من واجبها أن تصادق على مساراتها الانتخابية بنفسها وتصون الاختيار الحر لمواطنيها. انتهى قول صاحب الجلالة. وعلينا أن نعزز تبادل الخبرات فيما بين برلماناتنا في هذا المجال، ونعتمد الانفتاح أكثر على أساس المأسسة والتأطير الديمقراطي والقانوني. وعلينا أن نبني استراتيجيات منسقة للترافع من أجل قارتنا والدفاع عن مصالحها ورفع الحيف المسلط عليها جراء نظام دولي غير عادل وغير منصف، خاصة اتجاه إفريقيا. الزميلات والزملاء، السيدات والسادة الحضور الكريم، من المؤكد أن قيم ومبادئ ومثل ورهانات الحكومات والبرلمانات والجماعات المنفتحة تقع في صميم مهام واختصاصات المؤسسات التشريعية، إذ أن الهدف العام المشترك والاستراتيجي هو ترسيخ الممارسة الديمقراطية ودولة المؤسسات وكفالة حقوق الإنسان. ومن أجل ذلك ينبغي أن نتعاون نحن الأفارقة بكل مكونات مجتمعاتنا، وبالتأكيد أن ثمة هناك في الشمال العديد من القوى والطاقات والهيئات التي تقف من أجل العدالة لإفريقيا ومن أجل نهضتها. واسمحوا لي أن أذكر هنا واحداً من الشخصيات الدولية المرموقة، السيد دوارتو باتشيكو، رئيس الاتحاد الدولي البرلماني الدولي، أجدد الترحيب بكم في بلدكم الثاني، فأنتم بين أهلكم وأشقائكم وزملائكم، وشكرا على حسن الإصغاء.
شكرا السيد الرئيس. والآن أعطي الكلمة للسيد دوارتي باتشيكو رئيس الاتحاد البرلماني الدولي. Mr. Pacheco, the President of the Interparliamentary Union, you have the floor.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, Madam, Speakers of Parliament, Deputy Speakers, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, thank you for the invitation to the IPU to be present in this very important meeting. It's essential to know that an open government partnership will not be complete without the role of parliaments. And so, the cooperation with the parliaments is essential if we wish a real open government society. And if we talk about parliaments, we need to talk about democracy and we need to talk about IPU. We need to talk about parliaments and democracy, because if we wish an open society, a society where everyone feels free to participate and feel that they can give something to their own country and to their own economy, to their own society, is essential to have a real democracy. And when we talk about democracy, again, we are talking in different aspects. Allow me to say that we don't have a real democracy if we don't have a gender participation. It's just not possible to think that half of the population will not feel represented inside our own parliaments. So, the gender participation is essential to the IPU, but more than that, is essential if we wish to have a real open democracy and society. But allow me also to say that now in many countries, for instance in Africa, we have other aspects that is essential to assure. The youth participation in politics and inside our own parliaments. Again, how we may believe that we have a parliament that represents the society, and we have in some countries 50% of the population below 30 years old, but inside the parliaments we will have just 2 or 3% of young people represented there. So this parliament will not represent the society. It represents something else, but not the country itself, not the population itself. So it's essential also to promote the youth participation in politics, and they need to feel represented inside our own parliaments. Not just because we think it's important, also because we understood how it is essential to defend democracy as we wish. Because otherwise, the youth, the young people that don't feel represented inside their own parliaments, in their society, they will feel free to accept extremist ideas. And then they can try to go to the wrong ways that will destroy democracy and this security in all our countries. But nowadays, these two aspects are important, but people wish more. People wish to have an open parliament, a parliament that they can contact directly. They can present the issues that they feel important, and they wish to have answers from the members of parliament. Of course, this is a great challenge for all of us parliamentarians, because we need to understand that it's not possible to work as we did on the 70s or on the 80s of the last century. But we have also new tools that may help us to achieve it. Transparency is important. Accountability is important. But the new technologies may help us to achieve it. We saw that during this time of pandemic, the parliaments did not close the doors. We have a lot of very strong lockdowns. Many services needed to stop working, but not the parliaments. We continue to meet in person sometimes, virtual other times, in the hybrids also sometimes. Because we feel how important is our role to approve the legislation, the social programs that the people need to survive during this time of pandemics. So, what we need, it's very easy, is to use these tools that exist before the pandemic, but that we don't use as usual now in all our work. Because these tools, the technologies that may help us to be near the people and so to pass the message, to be transparent, to give an answer to all the people about our discussions, about the issues we are trying to discuss, the issues that we are maybe approve, or why it is not possible to give positive answers to the worries of the people. Because we are politicians. It's not possible to give a positive answer every day to all the wishes of the people. And they will understand that if we speak clear to them. As we do in our homes. It is not possible to do everything we wish. Sometimes you need to take options. We need to have alternatives. And if we explain that to the people, people will understand and will accept it. And that's why these links between the politicians, of course, the parliaments, and the people are essential. And, dear friends, the innovation in our way of work, the transformation of parliaments, to be aware of the wishes of the people and how to give an answer to them, to avoid the speech of hate between ourselves. It is not possible to, many people see parliamentarians as example. And so it is not possible to talk about a culture of understanding between people if we, in our discussions inside our parliaments, we have a speech of hate between ourselves. We needed to show that we have different ideas, of course, because we believe in democracy. We believe that people may have different ways to solve the problems of the people. And so we don't agree in everything. We disagree in many things. but with respect to the other, with respect to the ideas of the other. And if we do it, I believe that people will trust more and more in our parliaments, and we will achieve what we wish: a stronger democracy, and this way, a more open government near the people. And this is what IPU always tries to do. As we know, IPU is the global organization of parliaments. Now we have 179 countries associated. We are missing 14 to achieve 100% of the states recognized by United Nations. And so we have all kinds of parliaments, but we always try to share ideas, to understand that it's possible also in IPU to have parliamentarians from countries that sometimes have a lot of conflicts in Africa, in the Middle East, in Europe right now, inside the same room, discussing different issues, to present their ideas and try to understand the ideas of the other. One of the most important more important ideas of IPU, of the objectives of IPU, is to understand that from different regional groups, where people may have more or less the same way to analyze a reality or a problem, in the global organization as IPU, with parliamentarians from Africa, Asia, Australia, Latin America, Europe, Middle East, it's possible to understand that are different perspectives to analyze the same reality. And we do it with respect from each other. And this way, IPU is trying also to have concrete actions to promote an open society. We will work with this platform. We are, in our strategy, we have the accountability and the transparency of the parliaments as one of the essential tools to strengthen democracy. But especially, we try to put it in our job to solve conflicts. For instance, now we understand that one of the most awful conflicts is the war, the conflict in Ukraine and with Russia. What IPU did it? We created a task force with speakers of parliament, Speaker of Parliament of South Africa, the Speaker of Parliament of Namibia, the Speaker of Parliament of Uruguay, the Deputy Speaker of Netherlands, the President of Committee of Foreign Affairs of Indonesia, the President of Committee of Foreign Affairs of Kazakhstan. And they went directly to Kiev and to Moscow, try to build a bridge of dialogue as the only way to solve conflicts in our world, never the war. And so, dear friends, I understand that this meeting will share different perspectives, different ideas. How is possible in Africa and in the Middle East also to have a more open society? You can count with IPU to achieve it, because we share the same objectives. But more important than that, we understand that your presence here is a real commitment of your parliaments that you are ready to achieve a more open government and more open democracy, a more open society. This is what the people wish, this is what we will do, and this way we will have a stronger and stronger democracy. Thank you so much.
شكرا السيد رئيس الاتحاد البرلماني الدولي. والآن أعطي الكلمة للأستاذة ربيعة الكابوس، ناشطة جمعوية مغربية وعضو المجلس الوطني لحقوق الإنسان. كلمتي لكم. شكرا.
صباح الخير جميعا. Good morning everyone. So to be honest, you didn't leave me anything to say. For a while I thought you represent the civic society, not me. So thank you for all what you said about us and all the achievement, all the recommendation too. So ladies and gentlemen, allow me to say it is an honor more than a pleasure to be here and to be a part in this regional meeting of OGP, to represent civic society, to represent youth, and to represent women as a healthy exercise to enhance the journey towards democracy. So, and the first step to make it happen, for me, in my own opinion, is to improve the laws and to improve the legislation. Transparency, you talk about it. You talk about accountability. So I will say in all, it's the laws we have to improve. Dear all, maybe you have not seen my outfit. It represents where I came from, which is the south of Morocco, and which gonna leads me to speak about civic society in the south of Morocco. To be honest too, I will say civic society is becoming more powerful, more ambitious, and more active there. And I will give the credits to one thing and one thing only, which is the freedom of expression. You said it too, sir. When we have the freedom of expression, we have the doors that we can knock and to speak with the responsible, to speak with people, to dialogue, to debate. It can open a lot of doors. I can say it will be paradise, it will be hell, but we are aware about this. So it's okay. But at least we are not locked in one area, in one space, and we're not making any changes. So the freedom of speaking and the freedom of expression is essential for the civic society, and this helped the civic society in south of Morocco to reinforce the integrity, the territorial integrity, the Moroccan integrity. So I will be short. I would like to seize this opportunity to applaud the efforts made by the African civic society all over the continent, who proved their power to deal with the crisis. We are talking about pandemic, we're talking about climate change, we're talking about corruption, we are talking about a lot of crises. But civic society, the African civic society, they were more powerful than ever, just with their knowledge. And I will say we have to applaud their effort. So I would like to call European civic society in the north to discover the human fortune, the skills that Africa owns. But first, I would like to call them to respect the African culture, to respect the African identity and our independence, and making our own decision. At the end, dear all, I would like to call for a real commitment. This is a regional meeting that we're going to discuss, we're going to speak, but at the end we have to get out with a commitment, with a plan. So I would like to call you to be involved in our discussion maybe later, and to hear you and to hear us, because you need us as civic society. You need us, you need our engagement. Thank you so much.
شكرا على هذه الكلمات الترحيبية. والآن جاء دور فتح النقاش، نقاش مهم، نقاش حول شفافية الديون العمومية في منطقة إفريقيا والشرق الأوسط، نقاش نحتاج لفتحه والتعمق فيه. هذا النقاش اليوم هو من تنسيق شراكة الحكومة المنفتحة بشراكة مع المعهد الأمريكي NDI، وهنا أطلب من السيد الميسر السيد نيكسون للتفضل لتسيير هذه الجلسة. شكرا جزيلا. سيد نيكسون تفضل. كما أدعو كذلك كل المشاركين في هذا النقاش للتفضل. النقطة اللوجستيكية قبل بداية هذه الورشة هو بأن هناك تأخر في البرنامج. هذا النقاش سننهي النقاش على الساعة 11:15 وبعد ذلك ستكون فترة استراحة. So we're running a little bit late. We'll finish this plenary at 11:15. Then we will have a coffee break. Then we'll have the stakeholder sessions, beginning at 11:45. Thank you very much. Mr. Dixon, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much, and good morning to all participants. We've come now to a point where we are going to engage in a very interesting debate around public debt and how that intersects with the concept of democratic governance. So before we begin, let me join all those who've thanked the organizers of this conference, the government of Morocco. We have been welcomed here over the last several days. I think even in the remarks this morning, we've heard about the important role Morocco and indeed the city of Marrakesh has played in a number of important initiatives in Africa. I would also like to thank the OGP, who are the host of this as well, for allowing us to have this particular discussion on public debt. I'm sure that public debt is something that all of us have mentioned in the last several days, 1 year, as something that is important in Africa. I ask myself the question why as we frame this debate. And one of the things that comes to mind is that public debt is at record high levels. Some of the statistics I've seen suggest that it's the highest in 50 years, that the levels of public debt right now are 3 times the level they were in 2008. Now, it's obvious and not in contention that debt itself as a way of generating revenue is important to fund development, to respond to crises, and so on and so forth. But it is also true that unsustainable debt is an issue that reduces funding for essential public services. In 2021, 25 of the world's poorest countries spend more money servicing public debt than the amount they spend combined on education, health, and providing social protection. So you can see how it is a critical issue. Now, the development impacts of this discussion, I think, are well documented. But we as NDI find and see that examining public debt from the context of democracy, the issues around transparency, and sustainability of it are not as discussed. For instance, loans are often contracted without public scrutiny, without Parliament sometimes being involved in the process, and indeed in some cases, loans have been contracted in total secrecy. According to the World Bank, 40% of low-income countries have not published any data about sovereign debt in the last 2 years. This has a profound effect on democratic governance. And you can think about this in the context of corruption. I think the youth representative has talked about how openness is important to enable civil society work, how information is important for parliamentarians to be able to do their work effectively in oversighting government. So without openness, you can see how then corruption can fester. If you start clawing back on the role of parliament in oversighting the executive, then you're also taking away that critical idea that these institutions act as checks and balances on each other. You are encouraging the rise of authoritarian leaders. You are concentrating more power in the executive branch. And certainly from the context of rights, and I'm very glad that the speaker this morning talked about the right and freedom of information, that without that freedom of information, then how do we know what is in those agreements? How do we know the terms? And what those terms mean in terms of labor and environmental rights? So this is an important discussion, but I also want us not to look at it just from the context of the borrowers. There is a role as well for the lenders. And we know that across board, there is also not optimal disclosures by lenders. Nearly half of African debt is owed to the private sector. And I'm sure we are all familiar with the case of Mozambique, where 2 multinational banks offered loans in total secrecy. We also know that Africa's single largest bilateral creditor, China, and there's research from AID that has shown this, often have confidentiality clauses in the loan agreements. So we don't know what sometimes is in those agreements, and our governments are stopped from disclosing those to us. So this is a complex discussion, it's a complex challenge, but I'm glad that when we look at the composition of this room, parliamentarians, representatives of government, civil society, that we have the right mix of people from Africa to discuss this challenge and to try to see how we can find solutions. And for me, particularly exciting in the context of OGP, that maybe as OGP, there are ways in which we can find commitments into our action plans that can help us address this issue. So to discuss this topic, we have a very distinguished panel with us here. From my immediate left, we have Wanjiru Gikonyo. Wanjiru Gikonyo comes from Kenya, where she is the founding trustee and outgoing national coordinator of an organization called TISA, the Institute of Social Accountability. And I'll just say one thing. She's done very important work in civil society on putting this issue of public debt on the spotlight. She, along others in civil society, have come together to form what they call Okoa Uchumi Coalition. And that coalition has done a lot of work in raising awareness and putting this issue in the fore of public debate. We also have next to Wanjiru, Mohammed Savadogo. Mohammed is Chief of Staff of the Minister of Public Administration, Labor and Social Protection in Burkina Faso. And I think we are very excited to have Mohammed as well, because Burkina Faso is the only country out of 74 countries that the World Bank looked at that has made or met the terms of full disclosure of their public debt. So we'll be very interested to hear more from you, Mohammed, about how Burkina Faso was able to do that. On my extreme left, we have Francis Ben Khalifa, who is a commissioner at the Anti-Corruption Commission of Sierra Leone. And he's done a lot of work as well as president of the Network of Anti-Corruption Institutions in West Africa. And so we are also going to hear a lot from him about some of the work they have done in anti-corruption. And for me, I'm particularly interested to see in the context of crisis, how you can relate that to your experience as Sierra Leone with dealing with Ebola and so on and so forth. On my immediate right, I'm pleased to have Honorable Lucy Akello. Lucy comes to us from Uganda. She's a member of parliament in Uganda representing Amuru District Women constituency. She's a member of Forum for Democratic Change. but she's also done a lot of important work on this subject, and she's vice chairperson of the Committee on Commissions, Statutory Authorities, and State Enterprises in Uganda. And then we have on my extreme right, Jungjong Theophilus. Theophilus is head of programs and acting executive director at the African Forum and Network on Debt and Development. That forum has done a lot of important work across the continent to discuss this issue, and including engaging with international financial institutions and some of the lenders. So we'll also be very excited to hear perspective from you. So to start us off, I'm going to welcome Wanjiro to just maybe talk a little bit about what's your understanding of the public debt problem. Why is debt transparency and accountability limited? And what are the impacts of that? Wanjiro.
Thank you very much, and good morning. It's an honor to be here. The debt crisis in Kenya happens against a backdrop of a very progressive constitution. In 2010, through the work of civil society and like-minded, reform-minded political actors, Kenya was able to enact a very progressive constitution which provides a constitutional framework for open government, accountable government, participatory government. So the question is, how, despite a very progressive legal regime, did we manage to fall into a debt crisis? Kenya was in a debt sustainable position in 2013. We then elected in an administration that within 3 years ran into a lot of trouble with debt. So what went wrong? Our analysis tells us that one, there was budgeted corruption. Through ignoring the public finance management requirements, the accountability requirements, the disclosure requirements, which were in law, these were ignored. And in debt procurement, things happened behind the scenes. The second thing that happened that we found was that at the global level, in 2010, there was a report prepared by the World Bank and the African Development Bank that prioritized infrastructure investment as the way to development. And this brought back in the infrastructure-led development paradigm that says if you put money in infrastructure, especially large-scale infrastructure, you will grow the continent, a continent that is arable. And so we ask the question, what kind of investments does a country such as Kenya's, where 50% of the population are in agriculture, what kind of investments do we need? Is it really large-scale infrastructure to the extent that we have seen? The other thing that happened, China came onto the scene, and China was making development finance available with no conditionalities. And so what did we see? We also saw that Western development organizations or Western governments also set up their own commercial funding mechanisms. So we've seen a drop, a race to the bottom in development finance priorities. The other thing we saw is that the response of government, the policies that were put in place, such as the monetary policy, the fiscal policies, actually did more damage. So we already had budgeted corruption, overrunning expenditure, and then we put in policies that made the situation untenable. How? Monetary policy, pegging up the exchange rate, was making goods manufactured in Kenya very uncompetitive regionally. So we are not able to generate the foreign exchange to pay the debt. So we must borrow more. To fill the gap, we then have to increase revenue. And we are increasing revenue through taxation at a time when businesses are closing down and we are not creating jobs. So the policies made the situation worse. And I'll also say that we entered into an IMF-sponsored fiscal consolidation program in 2020. And this program, although it has some very good transparency requirements, unfortunately, this program was negotiated behind closed doors with Treasury. And the IMF has made efforts to engage stakeholders, but the government of the day has not. So even Parliament is not able to oversight the commitments and the conditions around the fiscal consolidation. And so the wrong policies, some of the wrong policies have made the situation worse. And the impacts, like I've said, since around 2016, we can actually see Kenya has been deindustrializing. Investments in manufacturing have been falling. We've had increased unemployment. And then, of course, with COVID, and now the war in Ukraine, the impact, like we said here in the panels before, has been devastating on households and businesses. So that is what has happened, but there have been efforts to deal with the debt problem, and I believe we'll be able to exchange on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wanjiro. And you know, you've raised a number of very interesting points, both in the context of the domestic factors that have driven and continue to impact on this crisis, but also the external ones. You've talked about the lenders themselves. I heard you talk about China. You've mentioned some of the international financial institutions. And so it makes me wonder, Theo, when you look at the international architecture of debt, is there something lacking in terms of adequacy of disclosures on a consistent and comprehensive basis? Are there any good practices you've seen among the lenders and borrowers that you would like to highlight when we think about how this can improve accountability, and particularly as you look at the international architecture of this?
Thank you, Dixon, and thank you everyone for this opportunity for us to be able to share our experiences on this issue of debt, and of course, issues around accountability and issues around debt transparency. And of course, you just mentioned the international debt architecture and the way it is structured and the way it is driven. It is about business and not about development. I think we need to get that very quickly, because loans are not granted because they are out to generate development, but the business element, you know, is what actually really carries the day. And when you also look in terms of the architecture, and also picking up from where Wanjiro ended in terms of a development strategy that is driven by borrowing, you know, it's one of the main factors, you know, that has actually plunged African countries into, you know, situation where we are getting to debt distress, you know, despite, you know, just a couple of years coming out of debt restructuring, you know, under HIPIC and MDRI. And this architecture is also fueled by, you know, what we call illicit financial flows, actually. When African governments are drained of the opportunity to mobilize resources internally, it's obvious that they keep reaching out their hands, you know, externally to borrow, you know, in order to finance development. And of course, borrowing transactions, which actually the intention actually is actually not actually to drive development, but also the business element of it that has become more of exploitative than actually having African countries borrow sustainably and address their development needs. And of course, this is not to say that borrowers should not make interest, you know, in their lending transaction, or lenders or creditors should not make interest in their lending transactions. I think it's a question of getting the balance, right? And then the question of African countries and the creditors and their development partners being able to deal with the problem of illicit financial flows, because this sits at the source of dependence on debt. And of course, we also have other funding mechanisms through PPPs, which also have contingent liabilities that often amount to debt. So when we look at it, addressing this problem comprehensively requires not only the role of African governments, but also the role of the creditor community, the role of the international development partners. It's very important. And the kind of relationship that we maintain is also very important in terms of addressing the issues of debt distress, because the architecture is also in such a way that the rules of borrowing, are not co-created by the lenders and the borrowers. So you find that there is a kind of a master-servant relationship that actually imposes, harsh borrowing terms. I will want to use that word, or inappropriate borrowing terms on African countries, and it keeps increasing the debt burden. Also, given the fact that internally being able to invest in ways or in development projects that are able to, finance debt servicing is something that African countries themselves have not actually, appropriately done, in terms of their borrowing and in terms of the kind of development investments that they make. So generally speaking, we have an architecture, like an international financial architecture, that actually does not support, African countries in their quest for debt sustainability, given the challenges, like I said, of issues of illicit financial flows that also diminishes the potential for domestic resource mobilization. So this is a problem that has to be approached, comprehensively, not just in terms of dealing with issues of debt, but also dealing with it in such a way that we pay attention to issues of domestic resource mobilization as well, and issues of transparency. I think I need to touch very quickly on whether the transparency has been adequate. And we can agree that the borrowing terms sometimes are not very clear, and where there is no information, it's very difficult for us to be able to demand for accountability. It's very difficult for civil society to do their job. It's very difficult for parliaments themselves to play their oversight roles when these disclosures are not made. And then on top of that, there are also confidentiality clauses, around these borrowing transactions that lead to secrecy, right? Where you find what is supposed to be publicly known or declared, is being held in secrecy. And of course, when we leave the people, in the dark, they are not able to play the role, in demanding for accountability. And then issues of information or data completeness. It's difficult for us to know, like, how much borrowing has been going on for the past 10 years, because also we do not have complete information. Information is available in fragmented pieces, and putting them together has not always been easy, and that is why we have different figures, coming up about how much countries are owing. And then the challenges of also breaking down these figures in ways that are understood by the common person, by policymakers. Some of them are not typically experts in issues of debt management. And it's, of course, there is a challenge of them getting a good grasp of these transactions and being able to play the role, the oversight role, in demanding for accountability.
Thank you, Theo. I've heard several things, but one which for a simple mind like myself has stuck is that debt is business. The lender is offering you something, and you, the borrower, you're also looking for something. And so it suggests to me that you should be looking for your interest in that transaction. You should be able to go home and say that you got a good bargain. But that's part of what we're discussing here. So I'll be very interested to come back to you later on and see whether you have practical recommendations on how we can move a bit on the question of transparency. But both yourself and Wanjiro before have referred to the question of parliaments and the fact that sometimes parliaments are not well placed to play their role in debt management. And so I wanted to come to you, Lucy, and see what your experience is as a parliamentarian What is your role as a parliament collectively and you as an individual member of parliament in debt management? Have you encountered any challenges? Are there any lessons you've learned from that you want to share with the rest of us?
Thank you so much, Dixon, and allow me thank the organizers of this conference. It's my first time attending the OGP meeting because my country is not a member of OGP. I'm here in my capacity as Akelo Lucy, a member of parliament, and on this panel. So I thought I needed to make this very clear and make a disclaimer because some of the things I may say may have an impact on me, as me. So, one, thank you so much. Me as me. Me as me, the experience I have had hasn't been the best. Dixon, as I speak now, in Uganda back home, we are processing a loan, a commercial loan, worth 455 million euros to finance our budget, for this financial year. This was something which was hidden away from the members of parliament from November last year. It is just being brought now. Members of parliament were on recess. We just resumed yesterday. And it is saying, we need this money passed now. And it must pass. These are the challenges we go through. And the broker in this is Standard Chartered Bank. And the real person, the real bank giving the money is even not very known, some Islamic something. So you see the chain is very long. So a member of parliament is expected to approve this loan. If you begin to make exceptions, then they go to your voters and you say, we don't have money to run this year's budget because Akelo Lucy is one of the members of parliament who has refused to pass this budget because of these technicalities. So in a way, your hands are tied because they are brought late. They hide away the key clauses or the clauses from you. And then at the end of the day, you have to make a very big compromise. I like the first two speakers, how you said it is a business. And I must say, I am on the committee of a PAC committee, Public Accounts Kwasase, Commission Statutory Authorities. And sometimes when we are looking at the postmortem, I call it postmortem report, how monies borrowed have been used, you almost want to slap somebody, but you can't slap. I want to just give an example, another example. When we're looking at the loan that was given to us by the Exim Bank of China to expand our beautiful airport. By the way, I want to tell you I come from the Pearl of Africa. Yes, Uganda. It's a beautiful country. And we wanted to beautify and expand our airport. So the Chinese, our friends, were very good to give us very good loan. And the contract is in Chinese. And yes, you have to learn Chinese to understand this. Whether you've understood or not, they've given it to you. One, they looked for the person to give us the money. That is the Exim Bank of China. They even went ahead and gave us the contractor from China. And they, in one of the clauses, they told us, if you have any issues regarding this agreement, we shall handle it from China. So you must look for air ticket and go to China. Look for interpreter to go to China. So there we are. And I want to repeat what I said. And I risk being maybe misunderstood by the president of the IPU now that he has just come in. He said, we must be tolerant. This is what I said, and it was in good faith. I said, the Chinese are very good. They always give us very good loans, but they are like rats. Yes, Africans, you know what rats are. Rats will bite you, you know, that night, huh? When you're about to wake up, it blows cold air. You go back to sleep. It again bites, you go back to sleep. That is what I said in Denmark this year in June. And I want to repeat it. Not that I want to undermine China, but I want to say all these people who are giving us money, to Africa, their behavior is like that. When they are coming, they come with the most beautiful smile. But the aftermath is usually not the best. They will blow you. When you wake up, you have a wound on your foot, and the person who has caused the damage is nowhere to be seen. You're on your own. Finally, Dixon, as Uganda, we saw a 22% rise in borrowing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And the World Bank, IMF were very generous and said, you can, we are helping you to contain these things. But let me tell you, this is my very honest request. Sometimes when a child is learning how to walk, the child will stagger and fall. And this is what the mother is always encouraged to do. Say, let the child fall, not so that this child learns. But if you want to give everything to this child and you protect, you put all the cushions around this child will never walk within the necessary time that is required. Sometimes, do not give it to us the easy way. Sometimes say no to some of these things, because let me tell you, we went borrowing forever. And if there's a need be, we even borrowed for things we didn't need. That is why our loan has gone so high. Thank you so much. I hope I can come back.
Thank you, Lucy. I think the language you're using resonates a bit with the audience. That's why they're clapping. I was a bit conscious myself when you say that the impact might come to you. I thought it might come to me as well, by your choice of words. But I picked several things. One, that timely and complete information is important to enable a parliamentarian to do their work. And so if you are given a budget and that budget contains this type of revenue generation late in the day, it really doesn't do you favor to be able to work effectively as a legislature. The second point, which maybe should be one that we all reflect on, is that I heard you say that while you mentioned China, this is not about China either. This is about all arrangements that result in lending to Africa. China just happens to be our largest bilateral creditor to Africa. And so these points as well might be things we discuss in the context of relationships with international financial institutions as well. But because of time, let me stop there. I just wanted to be deliberate in hearing about Uganda, because I'm going to ask Mohammed to speak next. And, Mohammed is a positive story. Mohammed is a story, he's going to speak in French, so you might want to put your headsets on as well. Mohammed, Burkina Faso, as we said, is one of those countries where World Bank is, and everybody is lauding you for the efforts you've made to fully comply with disclosure requirements. So how did you get there? What led you and what steps did you take to get there? And what has been the impact and benefit for you as Burkina Faso?
Alors, merci beaucoup. Et avant tout propos, je m'en voudrais de ne pas avoir une pensée pieuse à l'endroit de mon pays, le Burkina Faso, qui, depuis 2015, est assailli par des attaques terroristes qui ont fait plus de 3500 morts et plus de 2 millions de personnes déplacées internes. Malgré vraiment cette dure épreuve, nous arrivons un tant soit peu à travailler pour effectivement travailler, à sortir d'abord le pays de l'ornière et ensuite à respecter nos engagements vis-à-vis de nos partenaires. Respecter les engagements vis-à-vis des partenaires, c'est notamment la question primordiale de la dette. Comme mes prédécesseurs l'ont si bien dit, la question de la dette est très importante parce que, comme on le dit, au niveau de l'Afrique, notamment dans ces pays un peu sous-développés comme le nôtre, la dette publique doit normalement venir en appoint, voilà, au budget. Voilà, il vient en appoint au budget parce que les ressources que nous recouvrons au niveau de nos différents États souvent apparaissent un peu maigres et il nous faut effectivement aller vers les PTF, les partenaires techniques et financiers, pour voir dans quelle mesure nous pouvons avoir des financements pour naturellement aller dans le sens du développement. Mais le problème, les gens l'ont déjà soulevé ici, c'est la question de la transparence et la question aussi de la corruption, voilà, qui gangrène un peu la bonne gestion des finances publiques, notamment la question de la dette. Parce que quand nous sommes amenés à prendre des crédits pour aller dans le développement et que ces crédits sont mal utilisés, naturellement, ça donne un effet de recommencement. Donc, raison pour laquelle nous avons effectivement un stock de dettes très élevé, parce que tout simplement, quand on prend un peu l'exemple des infrastructures routières, par exemple, on construit par exemple une route, normalement qui devait avoir une durée de vie de 25 ans, 30 ans ou 40 ans. Et au bout de 2 ans, 3 ans, on voit que cette route se dégrade. Donc nous sommes encore obligés de reprendre encore des prêts pour encore refaire encore des dettes et ces routes. Ça devient des éternels recommencements. En dehors de ça, nous avons un peu les infrastructures éducatives, au niveau santé et autres. Les hôpitaux qu'on construit sur la base des prêts. Et les écoles qu'on construit sur la base des prêts. Et au finish, par le truchement de la corruption, on arrive à avoir des édifices de moindre qualité. Et il suffit d'un seul vent de pluie et nous avons les toits qui se décoiffent ou bien le bâtiment qui s'écroule. Est-ce qu'en ce moment, on peut avoir une dette efficace et une dette viable pour nous permettre effectivement de sortir de l'ornière? Non. Donc, en ce sens, nous avons entrepris au niveau du Burkina Faso de travailler effectivement à revoir ces données et de travailler naturellement dans la question des transparences. Et dans ce sens, et comme vous l'avez si bien dit, parmi les 74 pays au niveau de la Banque mondiale, que la Banque mondiale a pu enquêter, nous sommes effectivement ressortis comme étant le pays qui a pu travailler dans cette transparence au niveau de la dette. D'abord, c'est d'abord la question de l'intérêt et l'accompagnement des autorités par la prise et l'actualisation de certains textes. Effectivement, au niveau national, nous avons pris des textes pour favoriser un peu cette question de transparence. Et dans ce sens, nous avons voulu que moi, du citoyen lambda et au plus lettré, que tout le monde puisse quand même avoir cette information au niveau de l'endettement. En plus de cela, nous avons un peu au niveau régional le code de transparence de l'UEMOA, voilà, qui a été effectivement internalisé au Burkina Faso à travers la loi 08, qui donne injonction effectivement qu'on puisse au niveau de chaque État travailler à donner un peu à chaque fois les informations qu'on a au niveau de la dette, qu'on a au niveau des finances publiques de façon globale. Ensuite, nous avons la question de la bonne gouvernance. La bonne gouvernance qui s'établit par effectivement l'élaboration de certaines notes de documents. Chez nous, nous avons une structure, voilà, dénommée le Comité national de la dette publique, qui fait à chaque fois périodiquement des rapports. Et naturellement, ces rapports sont publiés, ces rapports sont soumis à l'approbation des citoyens, qui naturellement, nous avons des OSC, et dans ce cadre, qui donnent aussi leurs avis, qui donnent un peu aussi des critiques par rapport effectivement à l'endettement qu'on fait à chaque fois. Nous avons aussi l'accompagnement des PTF et la Banque mondiale, le FMI, qui n'est pas aussi à négliger, parce que ces PTF ont pu quand même permettre le renforcement des capacités, voilà, des acteurs au niveau de la dette publique. Nous avons des formations récurrentes. Nous avons aussi certaines structures comme le moniteur de la dette en Afrique, qui nous permet effectivement, par ces outils et autres, nous donner une bonne lisibilité sur la gestion de la dette. Et à partir de ces éléments, nous arrivons naturellement à voir comment est-ce qu'on peut orienter la dette, comment travailler sur le service de la dette, comment travailler sur le principal et sur les intérêts qu'on a, et comment naturellement dimensionner les différents éléments. Nous avons aussi le leadership des autorités en charge de la gestion de la dette publique. Et dans ce sens, nous avons une stratégie de la dette à moyen terme qui donne effectivement sur un bout de temps quelle est effectivement la vision qu'on a par rapport à la dette. Qu'est-ce qu'effectivement on a comme stock en matière de paiement des dettes, et tous ces éléments sont mis un peu au profit de la population, voilà, pour jugement et autres. Et en dehors de ça, nous avons les bulletins statistiques qu'on produit périodiquement. Ensuite, nous avons les rapports annuels d'endettement qu'on élabore, qui sont soumis non seulement au niveau de l'Assemblée nationale, voilà, pour naturellement validation. Et là, au passage, il faut dire qu'à l'Assemblée nationale, au niveau du processus même d'élaboration du budget ou du vote même de la loi des finances, nous avons les OSC qui participent au niveau de l'Assemblée nationale. Nous avons inséré les OSC pour qu'elles puissent effectivement être le regard un peu de la population, parce que, bon, on ne dénie pas, les parlementaires, c'est les représentants du peuple. Mais maintenant, si effectivement nous avons d'autres composantes qui peuvent aussi apporter leur lumière sur comment est-ce que la dette est gérée, naturellement aussi on le fait, voilà, pour avoir encore plus de lisibilité de tout. Maintenant, la démarche, voilà, qu'on a entrepris, c'est d'abord un diagnostic. On a fait d'abord un diagnostic, voilà, des points faibles, voilà, au niveau de notre endettement. On a vu effectivement que nous avons des points faibles, voilà, où effectivement, tantôt ce que j'ai eu à expliquer, quand on prend la dette, c'est naturellement au niveau de l'exécution qu'il y a problème. Et quand on exécute mal, naturellement, ça revient encore à un éternel recommencement. Et nous avons quand même fait ce diagnostic, voilà, pour revoir cela. J'ai parlé tantôt aussi du renforcement des capacités en matière de reporting, voilà, de la dette. Voilà, nous avons eu des démarches avec la Banque mondiale, le FMI, voilà, pour nous montrer comment est-ce qu'on peut quand même, dans ce sens, voilà, avancer. En dehors, nous avons l'engagement aussi du bureau des dettes. Voilà, on a un bureau des dettes et des autorités, comme je l'avais dit tantôt. Et ensuite, la publication des différents rapports. Donc, c'est dire qu'au niveau du Burkina Faso, sur la question de la dette, nous n'avons pas de tabou. Nous avons des documents. Quand vous partez, par exemple, sur le site de la Direction générale du budget, www.dgb.gov.bf, vous avez tous les éléments liés à l'endettement là-bas. Les différents rapports, le stock de la dette, et le principal, les intérêts, ainsi de suite. Tout est détaillé à ce niveau. Et à chaque fois qu'on fait les rapports et autres, on se donne au moins, au maximum, un mois et demi pour naturellement travailler effectivement à divulguer, voilà, ces différentes données. Donc voilà de façon globale ce qu'on a comme outil qu'on a pu développer pour permettre effectivement une bonne gestion de cette dette-là. Je vous remercie.
I think it deserves a bigger round of applause. Hearing a success story is always something that lifts our hearts up and also focuses on what we can do better. But I was also curious, Mohammed, before I leave, you've taken all these measures to improve transparency, and they serve to your interests. Are all the creditors in agreement? Have you faced any obstacle? Have you found somebody who wants to loan you money and they say, no, your regime of transparency, the legal and institutional framework you've put together is something that is not in our interest as a lender?
Non, en tant que tel, nous n'avons pas eu d'obstacle. Comme je le dis naturellement, la dette ça fait mal. La dette fait mal. Parce que quand on regarde le stock, c'est très élevé, ça fait mal. Et bon, on ne va pas quand même demander qu'on puisse quand même nous reverser quand même toute cette dette-là, c'est-à-dire annuler la dette. On ne peut pas demander cela. Parce que tout simplement, au niveau de ces pays, ce sont les ressources du pays qui prennent aussi pour prêter aux autres pays. Mais madame a parlé de la Covid. En son temps, effectivement, il y a une remise de dette qui a été faite. Donc, nous, on planche toujours dans ce sens pour demander effectivement aux bailleurs, effectivement, s'il y a des éléments quand même dans ce sens qu'on peut faire pour effectivement aider vraiment des pays comme nous, le Burkina Faso, qui sont effectivement dans la crise, malgré cette crise, qui arrivent à honorer vraiment leur part d'engagement. Je pense que ça sera le bienvenu. Sinon, techniquement, nous n'avons pas eu d'obstacle en tant que tel. Mais maintenant, en termes de dividendes, on note l'amélioration de la signature du pays. Voilà, parce que nous ne nous amusons pas avec la dette. Comme on le dit, dans un jargon chez nous, Quand tu prends crédit, il faut payer crédit. Sinon, si tu ne payes pas crédit, ça gâte l'amitié. Donc, nous ne nous amusons pas avec ça. On prend le crédit, mais on travaille toujours à le payer. À chaque fois qu'on élabore le budget, on regarde de façon prioritaire le paiement de la dette. Est-ce qu'effectivement, nous sommes en phase pour payer la dette et autres? Et même au niveau du FMI et de la Banque mondiale, c'est toujours des éléments quand même qui les tiennent à cœur pour effectivement voir dans quelle mesure on peut avancer. Ensuite, nous avons toujours la confiance des partenaires techniques et financiers, malgré les remous qu'on a eu, les 2 coups d'État qu'on a eu en janvier et puis en septembre. Malgré cela, je pense qu'on a déjà pris langue avec le FMI et la Banque mondiale qui nous ont assuré vraiment de leur accompagnement. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mohammed. I think what I take from it is that you can put measures in place to improve on transparency and accountability, but that does not necessarily stop lenders from coming to provide you money. So why not? But you also talked about COVID. And so as I come to you, Francis, I mentioned in the introductory remarks that you have had a lot of experience with Ebola crisis in Sierra Leone. We have seen a need, quite an urgent need for funding to address crises like COVID-19 and to move that money very quickly so that it can be able to achieve what it does. But we've also heard stories about how that has ended up in people's pockets, how that has become a ground for corruption. So from your experience with Ebola, from your experience watching COVID, are there any lessons, best practices you can see in terms of how we can, yes, get money, get resources in the form of debt, but also put them to efficient use and curb corruption and still be able to achieve the goal of urgency and timeliness in addressing the crises that we face?
All right, thank you very much. Yes, as other people have said, other speakers, particularly my brother from Burkina Faso, has just emphasized that is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a question of transparency and accountability around it, so policymakers can understand and make sound decisions. And of course, you also have other people acting in the accountability sector, like parliamentarians and us who are anti-corruption agents, can also hold those accountable. And also the markets can understand how well the country is doing so they can invest. So that is not a bad thing. And of course, we, Sierra Leone, have had 2 experiences with dealing with debt under pressure. First, to deal with Ebola, because we have our annual budget, which says 5% will go to health sector, and then Ebola comes. What do? You now need 10% of that, or maybe 15 or 20% to deal with it, and the same thing with COVID. So there are a lot of things that we have been doing. We had been calling, before I took up the job of Anti-Corruption Commissioner, I had been writing about this a lot, dealing with debt transparency and accountability. And we have developed from that, learned from that a lot, and now we have what we call the annual debt bulletin, which the government publishes, containing not just the debts from where it is coming from, but also certain clauses in those debts, so that it can help with public scrutiny and accountability. So there is this annual reporting that works. We also have developed a system whereby the Auditor General's Department can audit all debts, whether it's from the formal sector, from the informal sector, commercial debt, domestic debt, so that they can audit and report on it annually, and then civil society and other actors, of course, can use it to hold government accountable. And that has helped a lot, because that is a third-party kind of scrutiny of what is reported by the government. And of course, we also have, of course, OGP has picked this up, and I've heard it several times, that Sierra Leone has one of the most efficient reporting system of SOE debts. Because SOE debts, as you know, is one of the debts that the World Bank has flagged as the debts that are hidden. Usually they report what the government borrows or what they borrow on the financial markets, bonds and all those things. But SOE debts are the most opaque debts. In Sierra Leone, under serious pressure from the World Bank, as a condition for budget, for providing support for the annual budget, the government is required to report SOE debts, and they do so. So it has helped with bringing an all-round understanding of the debt framework and structures. What has not changed is the fact that we continue to borrow. We continue to borrow, and when COVID came, it has exacerbated. Our debt to GDP ratio has increased greatly. But the fact that there is some degree of transparency and scrutiny and accountability around it is helping us understand what to do with it. And of course, it's helping the various actors, whether it's the policymakers, whether it's the lenders or the borrowers, or all of us who are acting within the civil society, and sometimes accountability space can hold the government accountable, which I believe is a good practice. These are good practices that other countries can replicate. Thank you.
Thank you. Wanjiro, very quickly, the Okoa Uchumi campaign, you tried to raise public awareness on the debt issue. Is there any success story there? Is there any lesson, anything you did that stands out that you want to share with all of us?
Thank you so much, Dixon. Yes, Okoa Uchumi, maybe 2 points I can make is our approach to the problem as we interrogated with it is to identify that our debt crisis is a political problem, because Kenya, when it comes to transparency, actually scores very highly. We have the reporting, we have the documents. Under the fiscal consolidation program, the publishing of debt information has actually improved. But despite that, we still have a problem with policy choices. We still have a problem with disclosure of contracts. This kind of second or third level. We are not fully appraised of the commitments that have been entered into. So transparency in PFM and debt management is very important, but when you're looking at a capture of financial systems, you need to go beyond the reporting, because policy choices also matter. And if those policy choices are abetting corruption, are not giving the value for money and returns, then you're still in a problem, because you have to repay a debt that is then not productive. So as Okoa Uchumi, one of the successes, a survey done in 2020 by Infotrack, which is a polling agency in Kenya, found that Kenyans are very aware of public debt. As Okoa Uchumi, we have used the media a lot. The media identifies us as a partner by generating evidence, simplifying the information. We then drove a very strong narrative in the public media that debt is a problem. And the reason we felt we needed to say this was because we were having messaging from the Treasury alongside the IMF that Kenya's debt is sustainable, it's within manageable amounts, and we were looking and saying that is not the case. So from 2019, we were concerned and began engaging with media, and really, I think one of our successes has been to be able to frame the narrative, to make sure this, or contribute towards the narrative, to ensure this is a problem that is identified and is dealt with. And of course, we've championed the need for transparency, the need for public participation. I think the other thing we did, and maybe linked to that, on the Infotrack poll, Kenyans are aware and were aware of the debt crisis. They were aware that the mismanagement of debt was negatively impacting their lives. They didn't know what to do. And the frustration was, so what do we do? And what we found is that if corruption directly impacts the economic circumstances of people, then what you're going to have is what we've seen in many countries. People lose confidence in the electoral process. And as we went into the elections, we saw the registration of voters was below par, especially the youth. The turnout for elections was also lower than anticipated. The number of registered voters who did not vote was also low. And in part, this is because of a disaffection and feeling that this system is not working for us. We don't like the political choices. We don't believe in the system. So we are seeing a country, we have a contradiction in Kenya. On one hand, we have a very progressive constitution, very progressive economic proposals by the government that won power, but then you have a citizenry that's very disconnected, that doesn't buy this agenda because, they feel the system has let them down. So we've got a populist, we are moving towards populism, away from democracy. And the real challenge we have if we want to rescue democracy is we need to deal with the problem of corruption. We need to push for political accountability. So it's a very difficult message in Kenya because our political actors tell us only civil society care about this leadership integrity. Kenyans are only concerned about something to eat, about economic issues. But if we go in that direction, then what are we saying? We are saying the whole OGP then doesn't work. So yes, we have successes, but we are also facing a larger challenge of how do we rescue our democracy? How do we use the OGP to push for leadership accountability, to push for this stakeholder engagement in the debt recovery as we move towards, because some of the choices on the table are privatization. We want to ensure that privatization does not, one is done in a way that protects services to the people. So you don't want to privatize. For instance, there's talk about privatizing water. How do you ensure that there's access for water for, 82% of Kenyans work in the informal sector. A large percentage live in the informal. So when you're talking about privatization, how do you protect the informal? How do you do that without a multi-stakeholder dialogue around debt recovery? So the major lesson we've learned is we need to open up the debt conversation, the policy choices. Transparency is important, but the policy choices about what do you privatize? What tax do you impose? On who do you impose it? How do you ensure there is tax justice so that those who pay more, who earn more, pay more, and those who don't earn enough then are given some support? How do we protect the vulnerable? These discussions, unfortunately, are not happening in an organized way. They are not happening in an open way, and citizens are not party to making their contributions in the policy choices. Thank you.
Thank you, Wanjiru, for also drawing that link between debt and democracy. And if democracy doesn't deliver, citizens are dissatisfied. If they're dissatisfied, it's not a virtuous cycle, as you can see. I'm going to take a few questions, comments from the floor, because there's a lot of expertise on the floor as well. I'm not sure whether there is roving mics. So if there are roving mics, can I see where the mics are? Okay, I see where they are. When we come back, I'm going to ask some of the panelists to reflect on solutions and what we see potentially as things within the framework of OGP that can be included to try and address this problem. So keep thinking about that. We don't have a lot of time, but we'll come back to you. So because the microphone is there, I'm going to ask you to just hand it to the gentleman there. If you can make your comment short, quick, and sweet.
Okay. Good morning, all. So just two things. One, have we thought of blended financing? Also, when thinking of it, how to make it transparent? Because to be sincere, the African issue or the global issue of debt and the budget deficit is real. And unless we come up with a solution, the lazy mind will always go for the loans. So we have to start thinking of blended finance on how to make things work. Then second, there's a less discussion I had about domestic debts, which has also been one of the major issues that is even pushing those from the ground, because you've did a work for the country, they took your effort, they took your money, and nothing is paid, and yet not even interest will be paid to you, unless if there's transparency and there's a follow-up on that. So I want to know what's the take on that.
Okay.
Said from Nigeria.
Said, thank you, Said. And if you can give to the lady, I'll try come this way as well. I'm short-sighted, so keep insisting if you don't see me coming your direction, please.
صباح الخير. أمنة العرباوي، جمعية جسور المواطنة من تونس. البرلمانات تمثل الشعوب، والشعوب هي من يسدد الديون، وتأتي العادة، عادة اللحظة الأخيرة، لحظة أن نصادق على الديون لتغطية مصاريف الميزانيات دائما تأتينا بسرعة. هنا أقول صراحة لممثلي البرلمانات: هل قمتم بتنسيق مع المجتمع المدني يوما ما في وقت متسع للعمل على أهمية متابعة الديون وشفافيتها ووضعها أمام الشعوب لأنها من يسددها في نهاية المطاف. ثم أقول للمانحين صراحة، هل وضعتم بين شروطكم ضرورة أن يكون للشعوب رأيا في هذا بالاطلاع عنه على الأقل من خلال ممثلاتهم وممثلينهم في البرلمانات؟ وشكرا.
Okay, if we can move the microphone there, I'm just going to try get a sense of equity and justice, not focusing on one particular section. But if you can bear with me, we don't have a lot of time, so I'll not be able to make all the rounds. So we'll go to the back. There's 3 hands. I'll just take 2 of those. If you can start with the lady here, and then the gentleman there, and then we'll come to the front as well. We'll see if we can have as many as we can. Please keep it to 1 minute. If it's a comment, it's welcome as well.
Thank you so much. I'm Lizzie from Malawi. I just have one question to Muhammad. It was great learning about the positive case study from Burkina Faso. But I wanted to find out, despite that positive case study that you have shared, are there any challenges that you have faced as a country, specifically from 2 aspects? One, from the policymakers themselves in Burkina Faso. Any challenges faced around pursuing such kind of transparency and accountability around issues of debt? But also, how about from the lenders themselves? Any challenges that have been faced, just to learn and see how best we can probably pursue the same when we go back to Malawi. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Bonjour. Je me présente, M. Adamo Morou du Niger. Je suis le coordinateur du réseau nigérien anticorruption. Je voudrais poser une question surtout à la parlementaire en parlant de transparence de dette. Je pense que le Parlement, en réalité, est là parce que les lois pour pouvoir approuver les dettes passent par le Parlement. Est-ce que le Parlement, en réalité, lui-même fait en sorte que les communautés ou la population puissent être au courant de ce qui se passe? Parce qu'il y a la redevabilité parlementaire qui compte, pas seulement la redevabilité gouvernementale dans la transparence de la dette publique. Qu'est-ce que vous faites en tant que Parlement pour que le peuple soit au courant de cette dette qui est acquise, parce que c'est cette population qui devrait payer la dette? Ça, deuxièmement, je voudrais savoir en réalité, est-ce qu'il n'est pas plus nécessaire en réalité de mettre l'accent sur la transparence et la redevabilité au sein du gouvernement et du Parlement avant même en réalité d'aller au niveau de la dette? Donc la question nationale, la transparence. Je prends l'exemple typique de mon pays quand on regarde la mobilisation des ressources financières où 30% des ressources mobilisées avant d'aller au Trésor national sont détournées. Une fois au Trésor, le reste, avant de les investir, aussi 30% sont détournés. C'est là qu'il faut jouer. Comment faire en sorte d'avoir des hommes intègres, redevables au sein de nos parlements et de nos gouvernements. Merci.
Thank you. If we can have the microphone up in front here. And we will turn some of these questions into recommendations as well, because I can feel the sense that some of them are actually recommendations. Please keep it brief.
Thank you very much, and very good presentations from our panel members. My name is Rushaya Ibrahim Tanko. I work with the Energy for Growth Hub in Ghana. Our project is looking at power contract transparency, and we realize that in a lot of these contracts that have been signed, you have the issue of sovereign guarantees and contingent liabilities that culminate into increased public debt. My question is, maybe to Afrodad and the other panelists, how have you looked at transparency as a preventative measure? Because once these contracts are made publicly available and they know that there would be public scrutiny, you are able to ensure that the right contracts are signed. But there's also a general understanding of how it impacts not just the sector, but also the rest of the country. And then also just to add our colleague in Burkina Faso as well, it will be interesting to understand also from maybe NDI and Afrodad and the other panelists, when you talk about the fact that these creditors, despite the fact that there is a demand for transparency, they still want to give you the money. In countries like Brazil, in their power sector, they demand for transparency as well. And Chinese companies that engage there are forced to, abide by these laws. Why is it that in countries like my own country, like Ghana and Zambia and other countries, they sign these contracts deliberately, putting in these confidentiality clauses? So what's the hypocrisy about, and how do we ensure that we are able to move forward from that and learn from countries like Burkina Faso? Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable Farah Malim, right here. I'll take that as the last one. I have promised the program director that we will be done by 11:15. Right here, please.
I heard somebody say that debt is business. Debt is not business. Debt is corruption. They say in China, if you are convicted on a matter of corruption, they shoot you through firing squad. In Japan, if somebody becomes a suspect in a corruption case, he commits suicide or she commits suicide. In America and the West, they go in for jail terms, very long jail terms. But in Africa, you run for office and you become a member of parliament, a senator, a governor, a president, a prime minister. The issue is pure and simple. We come from the same country in Kenya. My name is Farah Malim from Kenya. We had the Eurobond. And you know where that money went to? We don't know where it went to. 2.5 billion. When the Auditor General wanted to investigate it, none other than the president came out and scolded at him in public and told him, what are you looking for? I understand you want to go to New York to go and find out the money trail. That money went to the president and his friends, and everybody knows that. We have the SGR. I was in parliament myself when we tried to put a parliamentary approval for anything that was going to be at that time $1.5 billion Kenya shillings guarantee, anything, including borrowing. It was removed by the government that came in, the digital government that came in 2013. In that 10th parliament where I was the deputy speaker, we had a problem because we had a contested election where there was a power sharing between two different sides. So everybody was checking on the other. And that was the best time the country ever had. This side could not steal because if they try to steal, this side is going to shout. This side could not steal because the other side is going to shout. And we brought down our debt to 17 billion only, both domestic and external. 10 years later, our debt is over $100 billion because we brought some young men, called themselves digital, and stole everything. Can we deal with the problem, my friend? Instead of NGOs, you are NGOs. Who is funding you? How many NGOs are represented here? If I ask you to raise your hands, all of you are going to raise your hands. Am I right? Who funds you? You're not funded by domestic African resources. You're funded by the West. The West doesn't care what is stolen from us because the money goes to them. Eventually it ends up in their banks and they own it. When the leaders steal the money, they take it to the banks in the West, my friend. Occasionally in the East also, once in a while. So the issue is, we are having a talk shop. We've had a talk shop for 60 years now. Do you want to ask the problems? You know where the problem is. Yesterday I asked my friend, my good old young man here, who's worked very hard to try and end corruption in his country, how many ministers, how many permanent secretaries, how many presidents have you put in prison? I know there's none. And they're the ones who are stealing the money. So then what happens? You go and arrest a small officer in a place, you talk about these things, it's always there in one policy after the other, a number of NGOs to follow up on those things. My friend Dixon, we've been with you for these years. Let us tackle the problem and talk about the problem where the problem is, and let's try and seek solutions on those problems. If you don't do that, then don't take Africa in a wild cycle of, merry-go-round. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Farah Malim. We'll be picking up on you. You're a politician, I'm more nuanced, I'm a technocrat. And you've really defined the problem well. But that solution, I also want you to define it as practically so that you get the round of applause here, because quite obviously, there's a lot that you wanted to say. If you can allow me, Program Director, just 5 minutes, I think we should do the needful and have at least 1 or 2 points of reflections on the questions we've had. And I wanted to start with you, Mohammed, if you can please, if you need translation, put on your microphone. If you can just take a minute and talk about Burkina Faso again. Are there obstacles you're facing? And there's a question that has also come, there's a hypocrisy. You are saying that you still have lenders coming to you, yet Zambia, Ghana, and other countries still have these secrecy clauses. Are we losing something in translation? Or lenders are still coming to Burkina Faso?
La traduction n'a pas été terminée. Alors, par rapport aux questions, je pense qu'il y a l'autre dame qui m'a interpellé. Voilà, sur la question des défis. Voilà, c'est ça. Voilà, notamment au niveau des défis, d'abord, c'est s'assurer d'abord d'une meilleure évaluation de la dette. Voilà, les niveaux réels d'endettement. Voilà. Donc, tant qu'on n'a pas fait cette évaluation, c'est difficile pour nous, effectivement, d'avoir effectivement une lisibilité sur la dette. En dehors de ça aussi, c'est de travailler et anticiper les crises liées à l'endettement. Bon, on a vu le cas en 2008, dans quel pays encore, où effectivement la crise financière était liée effectivement à cette question d'endettement. Donc, c'est d'anticiper vraiment cela. Améliorer aussi la signature du pays, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, ça veut dire être un pays effectivement crédible, un pays qui, effectivement, est apte à naturellement payer vraiment ce qu'il a pris comme crédit et pourra quand même avancer dans ce sens. Élaborer des politiques de prêt saines. Voilà. Ça veut dire que tout se trouve dans la politique même de prêt. Voilà. Si effectivement, tout ce qu'on dit ici, on n'a pas effectivement une politique de prêt, ça va être difficile. Est-ce qu'on doit réellement prendre de l'argent pour le prendre? Non. Vous avez parlé de la question de la Chine, question de quoi, Brésil qui donne de l'argent et on le prend comme ça. Non. Nous, au niveau du Burkina Faso, depuis des décennies, nous avons une politique d'endettement. Voilà. Même si, effectivement, au finish, peut-être qu'il y a des choses qui se passent et que la question de corruption, ça, c'est un peu endémique, et là, c'est partout. Je n'ai pas dit qu'au Burkina Faso, on fait exception dans ce sens. Donc, il faut avoir, effectivement, une politique de prêt saine et viable afin de réduire les primes de risque des pays. Voilà. Parce que tant que cela n'est pas fait, ça va naturellement envoyer encore toujours des recommencements. Mais maintenant, au niveau vraiment des acteurs, voilà, qui sont un peu pratiques, qui sont conformes à la pratique, c'est de travailler vraiment à vulgariser vraiment ces efforts. Voilà. Maintenant, il y a l'autre dame aussi qui avait soulevé la question des prêteurs. Ça, au niveau des prêteurs, c'est naturellement accompagner et encourager les pays emprunteurs à adopter des principes de transparence qui améliorent naturellement le coût de l'emprunt de la dette. Voilà. Ça veut dire quoi? Si moi je te prête de l'argent, il faut naturellement suivre aussi pour qu'au final je puisse rembourser. Mais si toi tu ne suis pas, tu laisses que effectivement je prends l'argent et je dilapide, naturellement c'est l'économie qui arrive effectivement à repayer vraiment ces dettes-là. Donc mener aussi des réflexions, voilà, plus en compte aussi des efforts qui sont faits en matière de dette. Voilà, merci bien.
Theo, and going back to what Farah Malim has said, we have to think about the lenders as well. Some of the money goes into corruption. As you think through OGP commitments, is there something you would like to see lenders, because there are actually lender countries represented here, make us commitments on this question of debt?
Thank you, Dixon. I think I want to pick it very quickly. There are lots of recommendations, lots of policy propositions, but the issue, is fast moving towards creating the political will, because we can talk policy front and back, right? What is working in Burkina Faso, according to Mohammed, right? Of course, I can say to some extent that is ticking the boxes, because we still need to see that move into development. But for us to get to that point, there is a political will that I'm sure that is what we need now. That is the direction we should be going now, because if you talk policy recommendations, we've always had them. If you read civil society papers, they are there. And I think what we need to do as civil society and governments today is to co-create that political will that can, put in place the right policies that can absorb debt in a pro-developmental way. And of course, I also want to highlight as one of the learnings that context matters. If you look at the Southern African country, Eastern African country, it's not exactly the same as what you have in a Central African country when it comes to putting in place accountability measures. So sometimes when we talk, we need to also take into account the specificities. If typically French-speaking country is not the same as a country from Southern and Eastern Africa, and the ability to push for accountability in these countries is different. And the civil society context in these countries is also different. And then highlighting civil society, sometimes we have a problem of agreeing where these issues are, which goes into issues of finding a common position as a civil society as part of that, creating the political will I'm talking about. And political will is also for those creditor countries, coming back to your question. Those creditor countries, they need the political will not only to put in place or lending transactions that are transparent, that's what we're talking about, but also relations, bilateral and multilateral relations that help countries to combat illicit financial flows. I still come here because this is at the source of the problems that we have. We have resources that was rightly mentioned that are stolen and stacked in their bank accounts, in foreign accounts. But sometimes to get these resources back is an issue. We know about the Abacha, the stolen funds by the Abacha government in Nigeria, and what it took Nigerian governments, to get these funds back. And I'm not sure, maybe a Nigerian could have shared us the experience. So I think it is important that as part of moving forward, please, let's just think of the political will, because that is where we are at the moment. It's beyond just policy issues. Thank you.
All right, I don't want us to go on record as the panel that was stopped in the middle, so I want us to stop the discussion with the acknowledgement that there are questions that have been asked that have not been answered, there are comments that have been made, but that make me then think that this discussion needs to go on, even though some of us might be frustrated. This afternoon, there's going to be a number of sessions, and one of them, if you look at the agenda, is also going to look at this question of debt opacity. And so that will be another opportunity for us. Certainly over tea break, which is going to be by the poolside. There's tea, coffee and tea available by the poolside. You can continue the conversations as well. You can walk to any of the panelists and respond and exchange on some of the issues that were discussed. But I really want to apologize that we've not been able to fully ventilate this issue for reasons of time. But we do have opportunities to continue. So I thank you very much for your audience. Thank you very, very much. And tea is out by the pool side. Program Director.
Thank you very much. Wow, we had full room this morning. More than 300 people attended this session. And thank you for the excellent quality of participation. Two announcements quickly, please. First, there are the coffee break will be less than 20 minutes to have the time basically to have more discussions. There is coffee break inside and outside of the space. After the break, we will have 4 parallel sessions. We have a parliamentary session for the heads of parliaments, and it is an open session to all the participants. In parallel, we will have a civil society session that will focus on discussing how to improve the work of civil society. In parallel with that, we will have local leaders session to see how local governments improve and engage in open governments. And the fourth session is basically points of contact sessions to see how different points of contact of different governments in the region of Africa, Middle East can improve their performance. Let's see you in 15, 20 minutes.